And finally, the House Agriculture Committee plans to mark up a farm bill next week. Chairman Glenn Thompson says he wants bipartisan support for the bill, but he has not gotten much support from Democrats who oppose some of his provisions. He still has not released the text of his bill. House Ag Ranking Member David Scott and Senate Ag Chairwoman Debbie Stabenow said in a joint statement this week that Republicans are proposing policies that split the broad bipartisan coalition that has always been the foundation of a successful farm bill. The deepest disagreements continue to be over nutrition spending and conservation programs. Congressman Jim Costa sits on the House Ag Committee and was a part of a meeting on Wednesday with Chairwoman Stabenow. He says when it comes to the farm bill, Republicans have a long way to go to gain more Democratic support.
Well, I thought it was a good meeting to begin with. Certainly, Senator Stabenow has a wealth of experience as chair of the Senate Ag Committee, and of course, her in writing previous farm bills. And that's very important because over half the members of the House Ag Committee, both Democrats and Republicans, have been there for a total of 18 months. So they've never worked on a reauthorization of a farm bill, a markup, and all that goes with it. So we talked about one, process, and two, we talked about details of the 12 titles of the farm bill. And of course, every member has different priorities reflected upon their congressional district, of course. It was a good discussion. Talked about trying to be responsive and on the markup next week in committee, and then see where that will take us toward hopefully getting to a conference committee and getting to produce a bipartisan farm bill that can pass the House and the Senate.
So some of the key differences between the Senate and House Farm Bill are the cuts to the nutrition title and then the removal of climate guardrails on the Inflation Reduction Act funding for conservation. So given all of that, do you think that there is any room for negotiation on these topics?
We'll see how it works out on the guardrails on the Inflation Reduction Act and whether or not they can be amended in the markup in committee. The same holds true with the Thrifty program on nutrition and whether or not that will be able to be modified in the markup in committee. And also the discretion of the Secretary of Agriculture on CCC funding and whether or not that can be addressed in the markup in the Ag Committee. I will say this, that if we're not able to reach a compromise on those three areas that have already been identified, then I think it's going to be very difficult to get a bipartisan agreement when we complete the markup.
We'll be right back with more from Representative Costa right after this. Welcome back. Both the House and the Senate's version of the Farm Bill has increased mandatory funding for specialty crop research. California Democrat Jim Costa says that funding is necessary to support the growing specialty crop industry.
Well, it's very important, and I want to commend the chairman for adding those fundings in the markup for specialty crops, because in California, obviously we do a great deal of specialty crops. And you couple that with the fact that we've not been able to get the bipartisan Workforce Modernization Act in recent years, because we do have a workforce shortage in agriculture. The investment in modernization and other kinds of tools with our land-grant universities and others is an important investment to make. Also in terms of seed technology and drought resistance and pest resistance efforts. The story of American agriculture is the incredible innovation that we've been able to do in my own family's farm in California and throughout California. We're at the cutting edge. Think about it, 4% of the nation's population directly involved for putting food and fiber on America's dinner plate every night, which is a national security issue. People forget that. It's a national security issue. And the fact that we're able to do that is in part because of these kinds of investments.
So shifting our conversation a little bit, I want to talk about the organic industry. So tell me a little bit more about what the Farm Bill needs to do to support the organic industry.
Well, I think over the last two farm bills, I've felt that we have made increased investments for organic farming. And I think that really reflects an understanding that uh, the American consumer has changed their dietary habits. I think there's more interest in organic food products on our grocery shelves. And I think there's not only a market for it, but I think that there are a lot of producers throughout the country that are interested in producing these kinds of high quality, valued food products for the American public. And therefore, providing additional support in organic farming, I think, is an important commitment that we make for not only American agriculture, but for American consumers.
So President Biden announced this week that the U.S. is going to place tariffs on China's electric vehicles, batteries, steel, and aluminum. Do you think that this could cause the Chinese government to place retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. ag sector?
That's possible. But the Chinese have not been playing on a level playing field for a long time. It's one of the reasons why I was very supportive, started by Bush and then improved by Obama, the Trade Pacific Partnership that involved 14 countries to leverage China on their unfair trade practices on not just a host of industrial products, but also on American agricultural products. President Trump decided to change that, withdrew ourselves from the Trade Pacific Partnership, and begin a process of leveling tariffs. I'm not a big fan of leveling tariffs, whether it's in the previous administration or this administration, because in part everybody has leverage, and so therefore your comment or your question, could we expect retaliatory efforts by the Chinese? Certainly, we should not be surprised if that happens. The previous administration, when they started this tariff war, the Trump administration, tried to cushion American agriculture by using, again, the discretionary funding from the Credit Commodity Corporation, CCC, the most amount of money that ever any Secretary of Agriculture has used to cushion and put a floor for a lot of the crops that we grow in the Midwest. But, where this ultimately ends up, I don't think anyone can predict at this time.
Do you think President Biden would use money from the CCC to help compensate farmers impacted by the trade war if China does put those retaliatory tariffs on the ag sector?
Well, I think if China decides to engage in a trade war, I think President Biden and Secretary Vilsack will look at every means possible to try to ensure that American agriculture is not singled out and punished as a result of that. I mean, the end of the day, China's a challenge because they're an adversary, they are a competitor, and they are a vast market. And that makes it very difficult when you have this adversary that's a competitor, but also a vast market that doesn't play by the rules under the WTO, the World Trade Organization, or any other rules that they choose on any given day to disregard.
Congressman, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.